Well, while the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, France and Germany and the European Union meet with Iran's top diplomat in Geneva on the question of curtailing its uranium enrichment, the United Nations Security Council is currently in session in an effort also to de-escalate the tension. Earlier, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke in that session, calling on the parties to give peace a chance, also warning that the world was watching with growing alarm and that any expressions of or expansion of the conflict could also further ignite a fire that no one could control. For more on this, let's now bring in our US-based correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us also virtually. Sherwin, it's good to have you with us. So diplomacy in Geneva, diplomacy in New York. What's the latest on both these diplomatic fronts?
Well, I would lower expectations, Alicia, of what you might expect from the Security Council. You heard there from the Secretary General, you heard from Rosemary DiCarlo, the Under-Secretary General for Political Affairs and Peace Building. We also heard critically from the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, right? So essentially, they are putting their positions on the table, but in terms of a product, a decision that requires consensus in this divided council, lower your expectations on that. What we really should be focused on is not so much what is happening in the council in New York, but really what is happening around the table in Geneva. The foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, of France, Germany, the EU foreign policy chief meeting with Iran's foreign minister Syed Abbas Araghchi. And what they are seeking to do is to get a commitment from the Iranians as to how they will contain their uranium enrichment facilities, which is really very much at the center of what the problem is here. If you recall what the Secretary General said there, as much as he's calling for peace, he also acknowledged that Iran it is not in compliance based on that IAEA report that came out last week, that they're not in compliance with their non-proliferation obligations. To quote the Secretary General, Iran has repeatedly stated that it's not seeking a nuclear weapon, but let's recognize that there is a trust gap. The only way to bridge that gap is through diplomacy. Rosemary DiCarlo, the Under-Secretary General, also talked about the imperative for diplomacy has seldom been greater. She also reflected on the civilian casualties that have happened in Iran, some 224 people that have been killed from Israeli strikes in Iran, but also the civilian casualties, at least 24 people killed, but hundreds of injuries on both sides. So the question here is, can we see them pull back from the brink here while you see this effort from the Europeans to get Iran around the negotiating table? We understand in coordination with the United States, and this is why I think you've got this 2-week window from Donald Trump as to whether they will go in or not here. So diplomacy in Geneva is where the game is at. Let's see what comes out of that meeting.
Absolutely, Sherwin. I mean, the White House also indicating a 2-week window, as you've just said, to decide on greater military involvement to allow diplomacy a chance. But what more do we know at this stage, as Iran has vowed no talks while they are still under heavy Israeli fire?
Well, they're talking, right? The foreign minister of Iran is in Geneva right now talking to the Europeans. So while there was this negotiation, the sixth iteration of the talks, which was meant to happen last weekend in Muscat, Oman, which were cancelled subsequently by the Iranians due to the attacks on its sovereignty. And of course, you know, the theory from Iran is we can't negotiate with a gun to our head. But what you are seeing here is basically the United States now taking a more muscular posture. Donald Trump has been on social media in the last week threatening greater U.S. involvement here. And so the Europeans, in a sense, have stepped in here seeking to get greater assurances from Iran as to some pullback in terms of their uranium enrichment. We understand from the IAEA report some 400 kilograms of enriched uranium, up to 60% now in Iran. And so the concern is to get it from 60% to 90%, which is essentially what you need for an atomic bomb. Can happen, enrichment can then happen very quickly. So there's need for a pullback here. And once I think you get some assurances from the Iranians, you might then get some assurances from the United States that perhaps they won't go in here directly in terms of greater military involvement. The Israelis are quite adamant that they believe Iran was within weeks of a nuclear weapon. The Israeli ambassador, Danny Danon, spoke just before this meeting at the council He was asked if there was a diplomatic off-ramp, if there were some assurances from the Iranians in Geneva, what that might portend for Israeli action moving forward. He said if genuine efforts to dismantle Iran's nuclear capabilities are seen, then there is something that we will consider. So even though the belligerent Israelis here, who really have affirmed their desire really to dismantle this through a military posture, even the Israelis are now saying that if they get some assurances, if this is a serious effort by the Iranians, they could then consider some different course of action here. But of course, everything will be in the details, Alicia.
All right, Sherwin, thank you so much for that update. We're going to leave it there with SABC News correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease.